I needed to wake my daughter and tell her, Shivani, wake up, darling. We're in a war.
The fact that you're Jewish, you're carrying with you thousands of years of history.
There was a Jewish quarter in the old city of Jerusalem, always has been.
There will always have been some Jews living in Tiberias, same as in Tzfat, same as in Hebron and Jerusalem. My family, they were living in Tiberias for 250 years.
5 generations in Israel.
They came from Iran-Iraq route after the destruction of the first temple, which was probably about 500 years before Christ. And they slowly, throughout the generation, just got to India.
So from the land of Israel, after the destruction of the second temple,
lots of Jewish left Israel in the year 70 after count.
there were groups of Jews that migrated around the Mediterranean.
My dad's family were from Iraq. My mum's side, her heritage was from Greece.
Dad was born in Sydney. My grandmother's from Germany. His father is from Poland. Mum's family from Libya.
Odessa in Russia.
Latvia.
Romania.
Poland.
Iraq.
Tunisia, North Africa.
Yemen.
Persia. Iran.
Italy.
Egypt.
Yemen.
Syria.
Azerbaijan.
Egypt.
Algeria.
Algeria, Morocco.
Tunisia.
Libya.
Morocco.
Iraq.
Germany.
Tunisia.
Poland.
Yemen.
Lebanon.
Poland.
Ukraine.
Yemen.
The Jewish people is a diaspora of all nations.
My family story is the Jewish or the Israeli story. It's a story about resilience. It is not a story about tragedy.
Farhud, which is the massacre of the Jews of Baghdad, where they only really survived because one of their Arab neighbours hid them in their house, and they could hear the Arabs ransacking their house next door, trying to find them. And they heard their neighbours being murdered in the streets and the screams of the rapes and the murders, butchering them. The people they knew. I think it went on for 4 days.
It's a type of Kristallnacht, when there was one night where all of the shops were looted, vandalised, there were threats against the Jews.
The moment the Arabs took control over Aden, they basically start massacre and steal and destroy.
There was a big massacre of Jewish in Tzfat.
My mom's side, her dad was the youngest kid out of 12 or 13 kids in Poland. As a very young person, he witnessed all his family getting killed in front of him.
They just went and they shot them and they stole from the shops and they bashed synagogues and all that. It was like every now and again, twice a year, 3 times a year, right? They could live with that. But then there was a big one in 1945. Many Jews in Libya got killed.
Jewish people were getting attacked by local Muslims, by the ones that were very nice and friendly to them. Houses were burned, people were being murdered in the streets, getting tackled with sticks and axes.
Hiding in staircases and basements and like classic stories of escape.
The Germans got to Africa as well, not only in Europe, and they sent the Jews in Libya into labor camps, and they killed them. From North Africa to Germany to get killed.
Tunisia was occupied by the Nazis. My grandfather was a plumber. He was already moved to a labor camp. They wanted obviously to use his skills. They took him and many others to the desert to start building those camps. And his job was to build the showers. And then when they gave them gas tubes, he went to his supervisor, told them, hey, I got this equipment I don't need that, I'm building showers. Obviously, years after, you could understand what was the purpose of those gas tubes, why they needed to be in showers.
My granddad was in a concentration camp. They were starving, they were tortured, they worked really hard building a road from Libya to Egypt. He was hung up to a pole for quite a few days and they starved him, they used to beat him quite a bit. And then 2 years later, they had the biggest riots in the Middle East, really, for that happened to the Jews. They came in with knives and slaughtered people, raped, stole.
And all her cousins, grandparents, all his relatives, they all died in Auschwitz.
there was the Holocaust and the German came to Tunisia and killed my uncle Victor in front of the family.
My grandmother was the only survivor of a very large family, and there was no survivors from Treblinka. Treblinka was a death camp. It was a factory of death. The train arrived, everyone was murdered, the train left, another train arrived. There was no survivors. She had not one living survivor of her bloodline left in the world.
When Nasser was declaring Israel as an enemy, there was a war, and then all the Jewish overnight became a persona non grata, and they had to leave in the middle of the night without taking anything.
Even at the airport, Arabs were taking rings off their fingers, taking their shoes off, looking for money, so they literally left with nothing.
A lot of Jews who were in refugee camps were there because they went back to their place of origin in East Europe, and many got killed by the locals who didn't want them to come back.
The safe place at that time was going to Israel.
It was the dream to move to Israel and to have a country, the Jewish country of their own.
Even though they did not suffer anti-Semitism, like in the Middle East and Morocco, they decided to come back as a yearning to the land of Zion, which they've held for many, many, many decades, centuries.
My grandfather, he treated this whole living there was something so temporary, even though it was 2,500 years culture of Jewish people in Yemen, because the only thing that they wanted to do is to live in Israel. The moment it was possible for them to do it, they came.
I'm not crying about my dad's house in Iraq. I'm not crying about my mom's house in Lebanon. No, that was the situation, that was what happened, it's done, we're moving forward.
Instead of revenging the Holocaust, we went and chose life. We didn't even think about revenge. We didn't think about terrorist attacks. We went and we built a country without pain. And we chose life.
It's good that people understand that Israel is a third of the size of Tasmania. You know, I think there's maybe 7.5 million Israelis now. Some of them are Arab, some of them are Christian. People think that there is a lot of Jews around the world, but there isn't. There is only 15 million, the whole world. There's 1.5 billion Muslims. Billion. Israel is so small, and there's so many Arabs around them, surrounding them. Look at these countries, the size of them, the amount of people there is living in them. And just think about 7 million trying to protect. It really feels like the narrative right now is that Israel is the big and strong. Really, Israel is, compared to these countries, is like a grain of sand.
You have Muslim countries everywhere, you have Christian countries everywhere. One small Jewish country in a small, tiny, shitty piece of land. Like, why not?
Israel is actually, the fact that it exists is a miracle.
Because one of my friends said, why don't you just leave? Like, you know, there's too much problem there. Why don't you just leave? And I wanted to ask her, where would 9 million people leave? Should I go back to Morocco or India?
People are calling for all the Jews to return to Europe. Well, there's nowhere really in Europe I can return to. Like, do I cut off one arm and send that to Italy or Portugal? Do I cut off one leg and send that back to Tunisia? And do I cut off this side of me and send it back to Iraq?
It's not like a bunch of white people coming from Poland or Germany after World War II. Today there are 1 million Moroccans in Israel. There are Iraqis, Yemens, where we had a bit of Turkish and Tunis and Ethiopians that came in the 90s. Like, we're talking about the majority, over 50% of Israeli citizens are actually from the diasporic Mediterranean, Africa, and Asia, like my mum from India. And then if you put the 2 million Arab Muslims who are Israeli citizens, we're having a majority of the Israeli population not being white at all.
Israel is a country that has to exist to keep the Jewish race existing.
There's a bit of a cliche phrase that is used everywhere, but it's true. If the Arabs lay down their arms, there's going to be peace. If Israel lays down their arms, there's not going to be Israel anymore. And that's the highest truth ever, you know. We don't want this war. And that's what I think people don't understand. People think that we have this crave for revenge and land. It's bullshit. This is like, can't be further from the truth.
It's a lot of sadness around this life, being Israeli, being Jewish. But I choose to be happy, produce happy to other people. If we believe to be kind to each other and listen to the other side and not just be blind and one-sided.
Once we choose to look at the bigger picture, once we choose to connect to our heart and realize that there is no real division and separation between people, there's just what we've been brought up with, what we've been brainwashed into.
It's very sad that culture and religion and beliefs that are put into people from childhood throughout their whole life separates people from each other. The choice that we really have is how we show up in this moment with one another.
Basically, peace starts in my home, in my neighborhood, in town, in this area.
I'm about peace. I'm not about boycotting people or being mean to people. I mean, if you boycott a business, you're boycotting all of the local farmers and suppliers who might not be Israeli. We've already got so many issues going on in the world. I think the reason we live here is because we don't want to be a part of that. We want to be part of a conscious, loving collective who respect each other despite political differences.
The simplest thing is to connect with our humanity, because we have a shared humanity, because we are more the same than different.
The majority, the vast majority, we just want to live with them alongside us, and for some reason it's perceived that we're like the exact opposite of it, which is very, very surreal.
I just want us to be another country that's left in peace, to coexist with good Arab neighbours, and to just be left alone. And that's it. Nothing more, nothing less.